Can everyone hear me? Excellent. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. This is a great debate, and I'm really excited to talk more with Don about this. I want to make 2 points for you in the next 10 minutes. I'm going to watch. I saw how vicious he was there, so I'm going to watch this time very closely. 2 points. One is that in the portfolio of policies we use to boost wages on the low-end job market, the minimum wage is an essential one. It's not the only one, but it is an essential complement to other tools that we have. And then second, I want to make some arguments about a high minimum wage, such as California's $15 minimum wage. You don't have to necessarily buy a $15 minimum wage as a good idea to understand that the minimum wage is an important part. And I think the focus on ethics and kind of ethics of policy under capitalism is a good way just to kind of sit on foundations, right? So there's a lot of studies. I don't think we're going to solve them here. There's many studies that find an employment effect from higher minimum wage laws. There's many that don't. The ones that do tend to look at states as the individual. That's like the Newmark studies and the Newmark approach. Others look at the borders between states. I'd like to think the second approach, I'd find the second approach more convincing even if I wasn't a minimum wage booster, but your impact of that's going to come and go. What I want to explain to you is the economic case for why that might matter, why the law of demand might be more complicated than the simple geometry of it. The first is that, and this is totally true under the normal thing, is that minimum wage might just be passed through in higher prices. So the minimum wage goes up and the cost of hamburgers go up 5 cents. I think this is what people often intuitively understand is everyone's going to pay a little bit more, but a lot of people will be taken out of poverty. This is very comfortable under the normal theoretical models, and it's certainly something that I think we've seen internationally at times with big minimum wage increases in, say, Eastern Europe. And that's, I think people understand that. You pay a little bit more and the workers get a little bit more. And I think that's an intuitive case that a lot of people get. You don't need a massive government bureaucracy, a complicated tax code. It's priced right into the services. The second, and I think this is very important, is something, the institutional approach. If people are paid more, suddenly managers have an incentive to get more out of them. So they'll invest more in capital. They'll do a better job training them. This is what economists often call an efficiency wage. It's very rational to pay slightly above a marginal product if you know you can get more work out of someone. And you often hear people say that when minimum wage goes up, there's slightly more investment in capital, slightly more investment to try to get their productivity up. And the third, and one I think is most important and most convincing, is kind of search models. So let's in this model of the way the labor market works, it's assumed that you can just kind of go to a grocery store and buy and sell as much labor as you want, like you would buy and sell as many oranges as you want at, say, a farmer's market. But when you guys graduate and you go and you find a job, you're probably going to want to celebrate the fact that you found a job in a way you don't celebrate the way you just bought groceries. Because finding a job takes search, it takes effort. It's not a trivial thing to do. And what happens is that there's huge amounts of vacancies in low-wage jobs. And what we do find when minimum wage goes up, and I don't think this is as controversial in the literature as the job effect, is that job tenure increases. People keep the jobs longer. They don't quit as often. They search harder for them. This has a profound effect in tightening up the labor market, and by reducing vacancies, you increase the jobs. And there's a case that's when especially low-wage employers have a little bit of market power there. They have the ability to keep wages not at the point where they would just close all vacancies. I mean, the reason the research got kicking in the 1990s is a lot of microeconomists were like, why are there so many job vacancies at McDonald's and Burger King? Why don't they just raise the wages slightly and eliminate them all? And this is where the search model came in, and this is where I think the kind of theoretical case for it came in. So there's plenty of stories under efficiency wages, search models. These are things economists talk about all the time, and they make perfect economic sense to justify why these studies go. But let's move beyond the economic case. The first I'd say is that the minimum wage is very good at reducing poverty. People debate the job effect quite a bit, but Aaron Dubé, one minimum wage scholar, looked at 54 studies of the minimum wage impact and found that 48 of them found a large reduction in poverty. A 10% raise in the minimum wage was associated with a 2.4% drop in poverty. And it was an even larger effect on deep poverty. This is incredibly important, right? Because I think often when we're talking about jobs, we get the sense that it's essentially stuck, right? Like if you try to increase it to the extent some people get more money, many more will lose their jobs, but it's definitely something that reduces poverty. More importantly, beyond just the and it's important for California. These numbers vary, but the people in poverty are not teenagers. The people in poverty are not middle-class kids or middle-class families. 96% of the people who will benefit from this $15 minimum wage are adults, not teens. 37% have children. Half have some college. Nationwide, more than 60% are women. This is definitely a target market that needs poverty reduction. So this is not, there are people who benefit, like all policies, who aren't necessarily the most in need, but the majority of people who benefit are people who need poverty reduction. Crucially, even beyond this, David Autor and other people at MIT found that the minimum wage held up the income distribution in the bottom half. We talk about inequality a lot. We tend to think of like CEOs or professional class people like kind of taking off from everyone else, but there's increasing inequality in the bottom half of the income distribution between, say, people at the 10% and 50%. And one of the main drivers of that is essentially where the minimum wage is. It's what essentially sets the standard for what happens there. There's also a so-called Lighthouse Effect. People above the minimum wage also get a pay raise. This is pretty found, a lot throughout the economy. Or through the research. There's a lot of debate about why this might be. Perhaps if you don't make minimum wage now, you want to keep that relationship with your employer feels that. So even if when the minimum wage goes up, people who are above it, above the new one, also get a pay raise. So it does trickle up in the economy. Now, what you often hear is, if poverty reduction is important, why not expand the earned income tax credit? Why not use public money to pay workers through the tax code? And here's what I really want to point out is that the minimum wage is an essential complement to something like the EITC. And why is that? The EITC is complicated and difficult in the tax code. About 20% of people don't claim it who are eligible for it. Many people claim it who aren't eligible for it. There's a little bit of fraud. That simply just doesn't happen with the minimum wage. I mean, I don't even know how you would estimate it, but when the minimum wage is X, people will ask for X, and that's what it is. The EITC also goes through tax preparers and other people who kind of get a cut of it. Many people who don't have children, for instance, don't benefit from the EITC. Like a lot of tax credits, it's very hard to aim where you want it to go. There's good efforts and good interest in trying to expand it further, say to non-custodial parents. But at the end of the day, the minimum wage targets everyone in that market in the way the EITC often misses. And third is that I really don't like the arguments that say like food stamps subsidizes low-wage workers. First of all, I don't think it works that way. And second of all, I think that's kind of a really bad argument. But the EITC, by pushing people in the labor force, does subsidize employers slightly. By essentially giving them, as brought up, a bigger pool of workers, they can bring down wages slightly. And there's some reasonable estimates that say about a quarter of the EIT is essentially captured by employers. The minimum wage pushes back against that and forces them to kind of dislodge some of that back to workers. And I think that's a very helpful thing to do. I think I have 1 minute left. Is that right? Okay, so so a big minimum wage, and we'll talk about this more later. The value is eroded greatly. What will happen? I think this is a good experiment. This is the point of a federalist government. We'll see what happens in New York and California and Seattle and elsewhere, and we'll be able to use that evidence. But I think there's some reasons to be optimistic. One is that the value is eroded in half, essentially, especially against the median wage. So the minimum wage is much lower than it used to be, and it's a big jump at first and then a slow gradual increase. A lot of the jobs impacted are not tradable, so I don't think they're going to move over the border into Arizona. We'll see what happens with that. It is possible that many jobs would be placed with machines. We'll see what happens with that, but that also, in terms of productivity, might be very good because when you have a large stagnant labor pool with no wage increases over decades, there's really not any incentive to innovate, and productivity, and particularly productivity per worker, has been stagnating quite a bit, especially in the past 10 years. And at that point, and I will conclude there.
Thank you very much, Mike Konczal.